You are watching the world 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Israel says it's launched military strikes on Hamas targets in Gaza, a move that threatens to spark more fighting after a truce period ended. US President Donald Trump will speak with Russia's Vladimir Putin today for the first known time since Ukraine accepted a US-backed ceasefire. Trump is looking to get Putin on board with a 30-day truce. Prime Minister Modi met Tulsi Gabbard, the United States Director of National Intelligence, in Delhi. This was after Defense Minister Rajnath Singh called for action against Khalistani terror group Sikhs for Justice outfit. US immigration attorneys are reporting a rise in the number of green card holders, including many Indians facing secondary inspection and even overnight detention at US airports by Customs and Border Protection officers. India and New Zealand have decided to start detailed negotiations on a mutually beneficial free trade agreement. This agreement is expected by the end of 2025. Well, a big focus. The Israeli military says it's conducting extensive strikes on Hamas targets in Gaza, while medics say that they've seen casualties in a series of the most violent airstrikes since the 19th of January ceasefire began. I must mention that the army has not provided more details about the strikes, but you must note that this escalating violence comes amid disagreement between Israel and Hamas on how to sustain the three-phase ceasefire that began in January. Arab mediators, as we've been reporting extensively, backed by the United States, haven't been able to hammer out differences between the two warring parties in talks held over the past 2 weeks. My colleague Mohammad Ghazali has been tracking all the latest developments. He joins us live at the moment. Ghazali, so Israel's latest move is throwing doubt on the fragile ceasefire?
See, the ceasefire was never a fragile one, and we saw that even since January 17, when the ceasefire was achieved, Israel has been conducting ground invasion as well as aerial strikes in Gaza. And today, just around midnight, Israeli Prime Minister issued a statement saying that they are sort of getting over the ceasefire now. They are getting over, and they are launching aerial strikes in Gaza. Israel's defense minister said that all hell will break loose in Gaza Strip till all the hostages are released. So it appears now that Israel has been given all the green signal by the U.S. administration, especially by the U.S. Special Envoy, Mr. Steve Witkoff, who has been on a trip to Middle East, meeting Israeli officials. And day before yesterday, he issued a statement that the way Houthis in Yemen have learned that they will not be spared for attacking on the ship vessels in Red Sea, even Hamas should take a lesson from that episode. And perhaps that was a perfect signal for Israel to go ahead with the attack. Until now, for the last 1 hour since the attacks have started, the Gaza civil defense forces have estimated that more than 40 people have been killed and more than 100 are injured. So it's been a terrible night there, a terrible situation. It's still closing to sunrise. It's still dark around 4 to 5 a.m. in the morning in Gaza Strip, and areas like Khan Yunis and other areas are under intense aerial strike. And visuals coming out of Gaza Strip show that women, children, elderly people have been killed in the aerial strike till now. Now, we don't know whether Israel and Hamas will yet again sit for negotiations and talks or not, because these aerial strikes are aimed at getting the hostages alive from the Gaza Strip, as per Israeli Prime Minister, because he said that the main objective of this entire aerial strike is to get the hostages alive from the Gaza Strip and also dismantle Hamas. He blamed Hamas for reneging on the ceasefire, but facts confirm that even when the first phase of ceasefire deal was over, Israel wanted to stretch it. One of the primary conditions of the first phase of ceasefire deal was that Israel will have to withdraw its troops from Philadelphia corridor, which Israel never did that. It has never pulled out all its troops from the Gaza Strip. It still has some security enclave built inside the Gaza Strip, and that is why this ceasefire could not work.
Ghazali, as always, thank you so much for joining us with the lowdown. The other big story we're tracking, US President Donald Trump will speak with Russia's Vladimir Putin today for the first known time since Ukraine accepted a US-backed ceasefire. Now, Trump is actually looking to get Putin on board with a 30-day truce, but the US and its G7 allies aimed to ratchet up the pressure on the Kremlin just last week by threatening to expand sanctions and also use frozen Russian assets to support Kyiv. But Trump signaled possible concessions for Moscow, suggesting that Ukrainian power plants and dividing up certain assets are on the agenda for the call. Investors, in fact, are also betting that the US could loosen sanctions on Russia as part of this deal. By the way, the ruble has actually risen 36% against the dollar this year, and Russian stocks have also gained. For quick clarity, we have with us live from Washington, D.C., Ray Locker at the moment. As always, Ray, thank you so much for joining us. Now, while Donald Trump sees this call with Putin as a chance to actually bring an end to the war in Ukraine, do you agree that it also carries risks, both for the US and its allies?
Oh, major risks. I mean, first of all, Trump's record on Putin is not at all comforting, particularly if you're Ukraine. I mean, he has made concessions time and again to whatever Putin seems to want. And a lot of times when he talks to Putin, he doesn't have anybody with him. So you don't know what they're talking about. We're not going to get an official readout from this call, or at least we haven't in the past. So it's guesswork on the part of Americans and Ukraine and our European allies.
You've highlighted that Trump's record on Putin is not comforting. This is something many analysts echo as well. Former diplomats and US officials who've dealt with Russia say their expectations are low. But many close observers of Russia say that language is a sign Putin is actually not in a rush to sign this agreement, and that what he really wants is to change broader European security arrangements.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, he doesn't want Ukraine to be a member of NATO.
Right.
He wants to weaken the military strength of Europe vis-a-vis Russia. And he's not in any hurry to do anything because he believes he's going to get what he wants in the end.
Well, let's see how this plays out and whether there's an official word from the White House on the exact details of this call. But as always, Ray, we'll revert to you for regular updates.
Thanks.
With that, let's turn our attention now to Beijing. Well, China has warned Taiwan it would bring about its own destruction as China sent more than 50 warplanes in a military exercise to areas surrounding the self-governed island. The military drill was actually punishment for Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te's continued promotion of separatism. This is what a spokesperson from China's Taiwan Affairs Office has said on record. Ray joins us with a quick comment on the latest developments here as well. Ray, Taiwan has hit back, we know, calling China a troublemaker, and their president has vowed to tackle Beijing's efforts to absorb Taiwan. But how do you decipher these latest moves?
Well, it's a clear provocation on the part of China. They do this for a reason. They did something similar to this in 2021. And so obviously it's something that everybody who's paying attention to this looks at with a lot of concern. I think if China moves even further, it's a major test for President Trump and his relations vis-a-vis China. I mean, after all, Taiwan makes 90% of the most sophisticated computer chips in the world. And so anything that jeopardizes Taiwan has huge economic repercussions around the world.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Ray, for your comments.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi met Tulsi Gabbard, the United States Director of National Intelligence, in Delhi. And this was after she spoke to Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, and he called for action against Khalistani terror group Sikhs for Justice outfit, as well as its founder Gurpatwant Pannu. Mr. Modi and Ms. Gabbard discussed ways to enhance cooperation to actually tackle threats like terrorism and cybersecurity. And they are said to have set the tone and vision for a stronger India-US partnership as well. During their meeting, the two also exchanged gifts. In fact, our Prime Minister also presented her Ganga Jal from the recently concluded Mahakumbh Mela in Uttar Pradesh. And a crucial update from the United States now. Well, immigration attorneys are reporting a rise in the number of green card holders, including many Indians, facing secondary inspection and even overnight detention at US airports by Customs and Border Protection officers. In fact, even in some instances, individuals are allegedly pressured to relinquish their green cards voluntarily. Now, who is particularly vulnerable? Well, elderly Indians who live with their children in the US but tend to spend the winter months in India appear to be particularly vulnerable to this scrutiny. So what's the law and what exactly is going on? Well, according to the Immigration and Nationality Act in the US, a lawful permanent resident, an LPR, or green card holder who has been absent from the US for over 180 days is considered to be seeking readmission and may be subject to grounds of inadmissibility. Now, while the issue of abandonment, which is relinquishment of the green card status, generally arises when an individual has been outside the US for over a year, a winter stay in India is now also facing heightened scrutiny. And live from Boston, we have with us on NDTV immigration attorney to understand what's going on. Alison Kranz joins us. Alison, thanks so much for your time. Can you explain what legal grounds Customs and Border Protection officers in the US are using to detain green card holders?
Absolutely. So the issue is that when somebody becomes a permanent resident in the United States, they are saying that they plan to permanently and primarily live in the United States. So when an individual is splitting their time between the United States and another country, there's some red flags that can pop up that can cause problems. These types of red flags that the officers look for seem to be contradictory to that person's intent to live primarily and permanently in the United States. So, for example, as you mentioned, the elderly are being targeted in part because oftentimes they're living with their children. They don't have a home. They're not maintaining a home of their own. They don't necessarily have jobs in the United States. Right. So because they don't have income, they're not paying US taxes. That's another tie to the United States that they're missing. And so these types of things under this atmosphere of heightened scrutiny can cause quite a few problems for individuals and have an additional line of questions being asked.
Alison, so how can green card holders ensure that they maintain their status when spending significant time outside the US?
Well, I think the easiest way is to shorten some of those trips, to make sure you're spending more than half of the year in the United States. Perhaps if you're going to spend the winters abroad, take that in smaller segments. Take a couple different trips instead of one particular trip. Another way is to maintain a permanent residence. And if you're maintaining a permanent residence with your children, that still is your permanent residence. That still can become your address. So that's also really important. Also, paying your taxes, even if you're not having regular income, just the fact that you're declaring your taxes is another tie to the United States, showing an intent to return and permanently reside there.
Also, Alison, just clarification on one important point. Is the pressure to voluntarily relinquish a green card actually legal? And what should green card holders do if they face this situation?
I think that when someone is placed into secondary inspection, so they're taken out of line, out of the Customs and Border Patrol, or Border Protection line, and they're put into secondary inspection, that can be a stressful situation. Oftentimes people have to wait for long periods of time. They don't know what's going on. And so just being there adds extra pressure. But there's a couple important things to keep in mind. Number one, that those officers can't take away your permanent residence. They might ask you questions leading you to believe that you have to sign papers to give up your permanent residence. That's not true. And those officers can't take it away from you.
Well, thank you so much, Alison, for that crucial clarification. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates as and when things progress with the Customs and Border Protection officers as well.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said it was important to strengthen ties with reliable allies in Europe as he met British and French leaders on his first overseas visit amid tensions with the United States. Mr. Carney's decision to actually visit Paris and London instead of Washington, as is casual for Canadian leaders, comes after US President Donald Trump escalated trade tensions with both Canada and Europe and floated threats of annexing Canada as well. And NASA astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore are finally set to return to Earth. They are preparing for a Tuesday evening splashdown off the coast of Florida. As we've been reporting, their mission, initially planned as a brief 8-day test flight aboard Boeing Starliner spacecraft, was extended due to unforeseen technical issues with their vehicle. But Sunita Williams is returning aboard SpaceX Dragon spacecraft with Butch Wilmore and 2 other Crew 9 members. Slipping into a very quick break for now. Back in a moment. Do stay tuned. India and New Zealand have restarted free trade talks after a decade, after negotiations fell apart. This was 10 years ago. as Prime Minister Christopher Luxon began his 5-day tour of Delhi, where he held bilateral talks with our Prime Minister. So now the two sides have agreed to begin the first round of negotiations next month. And you must note that bilateral trade between our two countries is valued at under $2 billion currently. But besides trade, New Zealand said it was deepening its engagement with India across areas such as defense, security, sports and environment, adding that economic ties with Delhi were a key priority.
India's FTA push amid Trump's tariff battle. India-Kiwi free trade negotiations are the latest to resume. India and New Zealand have restarted the talks a decade after negotiations fell apart, as Prime Minister Christopher Luxon began his 5-day tour of Delhi. Prime Minister Luxon met Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday. Apart from the resumption of FTA talks, 3 MOUs were exchanged in the fields of defense, sports and horticulture.
दोनों देशों के बीच एक परस्पर लाभकारी फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट पर नेगोशिएशंस शुरू करने का निर्णय लिया गया है। इससे आपसी व्यापार और निवेश के पोटेंशियल को बढ़ावा मिलेगा। डेयरी, फूड प्रोसेसिंग और फार्मा जैसे क्षेत्रों में आपसी सहयोग और निवेश को प्रोत्साहित किया जाएगा।
Our two-way trade today stands at around $3 billion New Zealand dollars a year, but there is huge potential to grow, and we will launch immediately comprehensive free trade agreement negotiations, making sure that we work towards a balanced, ambitious and comprehensive agreement.
Thank you,
New
sir.
Zealand and India are also working on an agreement to ease entry of skilled labour as well as easing immigration.
I hope that our meeting has left Prime Minister Modi in no doubt about the profound depth of New Zealand's commitment to building a deep, broad-based and enduring relationship with the great nation of India. By broad-based, I mean that New Zealand is committed to doing more with India across a wide range of areas: defence and security, trade and economics, people-to-people ties, education, tourism, sports and culture.
Earlier in March, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar visited UK and Ireland to strengthen diplomatic and trade ties. In Ireland, a joint economic commission to increase our trade investment and technology linkages was agreed upon. In February, India and the UK too resumed their FTA talks. Union Minister Piyush Goyal expects it to be a win-win situation for both countries.
आगे चल के भारत और यूनाइटेड किंगडम के बीच हमारे संबंध, हमारे व्यापार के संभावनाओं को हम बड़े रूप में आगे लेके जा सकते हैं।
Amid the changing geopolitical situation and threats of tariffs by the US, the West is now looking for a more reliable trade partner in India. First week of March saw Belgian economic mission led by Princess Astrid and accompanied with over 350 business and industry leaders from Belgium arrive in India. EU Commission President was also in India in February with all 12 EU commissioners. Von der Leyen confirmed that an FTA between India and the EU will be formalized by the end of this year.
Finalize our free trade agreement before the end of the year. We're expecting a lot of our trade negotiators. We told them they should surprise us.
Meanwhile, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal visited the US on the Doubling Trade by 2030 mission. Two significant wars in Europe and the Middle East have not only amplified geopolitical tensions but also destabilized global energy supplies and food security. Post-COVID-19, India under Prime Minister Modi's leadership has emerged as the choice of many over China, offering a much-needed stability. With Mohammad Ghazali, Bureau Report, NDTV.
Well, proximity to New Zealand is crucial to Delhi's interests, as you know, as India aims to counter China in the Indian Ocean region. But meanwhile, you must note that the UK Trade Minister is attempting to fend off the threat of US tariffs. Britain's Business and Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, is traveling to Washington today to meet his US counterparts in the hope of strengthening economic ties as Donald Trump continues to target long-standing allies with tariffs. Mr. Reynolds is actually due to meet US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Trade Representative Jamie Sinclair Britain's Department of Business and Trade has informed us. Thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. As always, we'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.